Kia ora tātou. In this video we'll look at the last form of variation source, or the last source of variation, which comes from mutations. And this is the ultimate source of variation, or the ultimate source of new alleles, and we'll discover why that is. So if we've got a piece of DNA that is called a gene, we've been through that, and then the particular version of that gene is called the allele. Let's say that this allele here, let's say that this gene is for hair color, and this particular allele, so this base sequence here, remember it's the base sequence, so the base sequence is, in this case, is A, T, T, C, G, the sequence of those bases. That is what determines what the allele codes for. So let's say this base sequence codes for brown hair. Now a mutation, let me get this on a pen, a mutation is a permanent change in the permanent change in the base sequence of DNA. So if we were to get a mutation for this, seeing all of the last videos, that would change the base sequence of this allele. So we could, let's rub out one of these, let's get rid of this one here. So let's turn that from a T into an A. So we've now changed the sequence of this, and so because the last base sequence coded for brown hair, what can happen is either nothing can happen, or there could be a positive change for the individual, or a negative change for the individual, which would mean that it would be less likely to survive, or like a neutral change. So I mean, what could happen is that this this new base sequence could potentially no longer code for brown hair, and let's say it now codes for ginger hair. Why not? And I feel I can only say this because I'm sure that I contain this allele. And so for an individual, if there was like a particular selective advantage for ginger hair in a population, then that would mean that would be a beneficial mutation. Or if there was a negative reason for having ginger hair, then that would be a negative mutation. So sometimes you'll get a question talking about whether or not a mutation could increase the survival chance, and then therefore that allele will be passed on to the population, or not. The other thing is that mutations are the ultimate source of new alleles. And that is because in the last sources of variation that we had, we weren't actually creating any new alleles. So if a population has only like 2 alleles, one might be for brown hair, one might be for blonde hair, no matter how you shuffle those alleles around, no individuals can have any different hair type other than blue or brown hair. But a mutation can actually completely change what an allele is, and give a whole new potential outcome for individuals. So that's why we say that mutations are the ultimate source of new alleles, because they're the only thing that aren't no longer shuffling around the alleles that are already there. They create new alleles. And the very last thing that we would need to know is that mutations will only be passed on if they occur during meiosis. So if there was a mutation that occurred when our skin cells were reproducing, then that is not going to be passed on to any offspring, because that is in the skin cell. So it's only if a mutation occurs during meiosis that mutation would then be passed on to the offspring, and that would be the entirety of the new offspring's genetic code. And so that new offspring would contain that allele in all of its body cells. Whereas if an individual has a mutation in one cell, then it's going to only be the cells that are reproduced from that particular cell that have that mutation. So that's the last source of variation that we need to know. So we've got independent assortment, crossing over, fertilization, and mutation. So in the next video, and I think the last, we will look at the difference between phenotype as a result of genes or phenotype as a result of the environment. Thanks, see you then.